My name is Carl Bates. I'm the Director of Research Communications in Duke's Office of University Communications. And I am here to moderate this panel from my sort of puppet master position at the back because there are 4 panelists with us today. Starting on your left, Ms. Donna Chavis comes to us from Pembroke. She is Senior Fossil Fuels Campaigner for Friends of the Earth and is involved with the NC Climate Justice Collective and is also an elder of the Lumbee Nation. She's going to be talking about the experience inland where it flooded like mad. Cedric Harrison is founder of Support the Port in Wilmington and a social media star. And his skills with social media actually came to the fore during this event in Wilmington when people didn't necessarily have transistor radios, but they still had phones. Cedric launched a social media campaign that kept people up to speed. We're going to hear about that. Colonel retired Rhett Newton is the mayor of Beaufort. He, after his Air Force career, didn't elect to fly jetliners. He instead went to graduate school, which he might have to explain to us for some reason. And the next thing he knew, he was the mayor of Beaufort, where he studies. And Dr. Andy Reed is the director of the Duke Marine Lab, where Rhett is a student. That makes for an interesting pecking order, like who's the boss between the two. Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to start with each of you. I would like you to just give us just a couple of minutes on where were you during Florence. This is sort of the day's events. This is the during portion, and then we're going to talk towards the end of our hour about what you learned. So I'm not particular about who starts. Colonel Newton, you want to go first?
Sure. I chose to stay. We watched very carefully as the storm approached. Actually, the week before, I was in the Bering Sea doing drone work with seals and stellar sea lions, and it was glorious. And I come home, and we've got a Cat 4 heading our way. So we're watching it very closely. Fortunately, it did deviate to the west before it came directly at Beaufort, so I chose to stay. Scott Simon took great offense at the fact that I chose to stay when there was a mandatory evacuation going on there, but it was the right choice based on the circumstances. Next time, it will depend. It just depends on what the storm will look like, whether I choose to stay or not. But I did stay in Beaufort.
Yeah, I didn't stay in Wilmington during the storm. I'm a Wilmingtonian native, and at first I was totally going to stay because the hurricanes usually just mean 3 days off. But maybe by 2 days before the actual storm hit, our local government did a press conference addressing the hurricane, and it was the first time in ever of my many years of existence in Wilmington that I've ever seen the government take that type of measure to have us get out of town and gather the belongings that we may need to get our families out. And so we were privileged, me and some of my friends were able to leave. We were going to go to Raleigh at first, but during that time, it was still a rumor that the storm may actually go towards that direction as well. So I ended up going to Greensboro for that first day. And then once the storm made that mixed direction from the first contact, I ended up going to Raleigh that second day. And I finished the other part of how we got back to Wilmington on in between the second and third day before all of the stuff started to collapse.
Wilmington, you'll recall, was hit twice. There was the initial rainfall, and then all the water from upstate hit them a second time. So downtown flooded twice. Cedric was there for the second one. We'll talk about that in a minute. Andy?
Before I tell you where I was, I'll just say that when Lee showed his animation of the storm approaching the coast, I wanted to throw up. I mean, it just brings back a lot of bad memories for those of us who kind of stayed through the storm. My wife and I live on a century-old farm about 15 miles east of Beaufort, and we rode out the storm there so we could look after the animals and so we could get into the lab quickly to assess damage and make sure that the infrastructure in the lab was okay. So we stayed.
And I had a both and as well. I stayed for the first few days, and then we decided, I'm from Pembroke, as was said, which is inland, 90 miles from the coast. But if you all know the history, our county was the worst hit for Matthew, and then Florence was coming with similar damage expected. I have to do a before in terms of why I left. We were without electricity for 2 weeks with Matthew. Literally, we were the very last house that was received our electricity back at the end of that storm. And so after 3 days, my panic was, I can't do 2 more weeks without electricity. And so my daughter living in Cumberland County had taken in her in-laws from Lumberton. So we actually left and went up to the mountains where my husband Mac's family lives. However, I learned later, and this is something I'll talk about later, that no one knew I was gone because I was on social media so much, making contacts for decision makers and helping people connect to recovery efforts, etc. That 2 months later, I found out no one knew I wasn't home. So that was a good security issue. I didn't have to worry about someone breaking in. But as I said, for me, my experience in Robeson cannot be divorced from Matthew and Florence. So you may hear me speaking about both of those today.
Let's go back the other way then, Donna. Could you start by telling us what that communication effort was like during the storm? Who were you talking to? How well was social media working, and why social media and not other forms of communication?
Well, and I think that in terms of communication, that for me is one of the most critical elements during a storm. In the case where we're looking at my county anyway, where all electricity was gone for up to 2 weeks for some people, then you don't have access to your television, radio, etc. And so what happened was that the social media was the important form of communication. My experience was that it was predominantly the social justice organizations who was using Facebook predominantly, but all forms of social media were in play. And as someone said earlier, we may not have had TV and radio, but we had our cell phones. And we all know the statistics that almost everybody has a smartphone these days. The problem that came up with that, of course, is that without electricity, how do you charge? And I live in the rural part of the county, and so you don't have access to businesses that may have had generators that allowed people to charge. And so one of the learnings I got out of it was the availability of solar power chargers now. That we were lucky we had a component that we could hook up to our car battery and keep our cell phones charged. But that's, that cost, and it also takes a lot of understanding of technology. So social media was the form of communication for road closings, availabilities of recovery, and like I said, the most use of that came from social justice groups and activist groups. Unfortunately, we didn't find the regulatory and government agencies using social media as much as we think they could have.
Andy, you were physically separated from the lab, and all of your folks, most of your folks were inland. Your students all came up here to Durham. How did you keep everybody on board with what was going on?
Yeah, I'm just remembering that the day after the storm, wandering around down east with my phone, trying to find, through floodwater, trying to find cell coverage so that I could get a message out to let people know that we were okay, and then to see if I could find out how Rhett and everybody in Beaufort was.
Well, Rhett was on TV. We'll talk about that.
Well, not that day he wasn't, and there was no TV for us for 10 days either. We had no power for 10 days, and we had very little cell coverage. The lesson we learned was that, there are other options for emergency communications. The next thing we're going to do is both the individual who's responsible for the physical plant at the Marine Lab and I are both going to have satellite phones. So when the cell coverage goes out, at least we'll be able to get messages back up to main campus in Durham, let people know. But I agree with what you said too. Social media was really critical after the storm. That was the way we could get everybody to know how things were, tell people not to try and come back to the coast right away because the roads were flooded, and I think that was really critical.
And Cedric, you launched a whole new network during that.
Yeah, we kind of started off before the storm came. Just like I told you, being a Wilmington native, if you're from Wilmington, a hurricane is just a vacation. And so when they first started to make the announcement about Florence coming close, it was mixed reviews and mixed opinions, and everybody's an expert on Facebook. So it was a lot of chaos as far as information, because it was some people that were like, don't worry about it. They're just saying that the scare is not going to, they said it about all the storms. And then there's other people that were like, are you crazy? You need to get out of town right now, And so it was like you were either like Y2K, scared, or you were like, this is nothing. And so we wanted to be a actual reliable source of like real tangible information that you can utilize to prepare for you and your family for the storm. And so we just started to share the real media information that was coming out. So we started to follow a lot of the reliable sources that you all are familiar with. And from that, we started to gain a lot of traction. And then before the storm even hit, we started to help people with preparing for the storm and what was to come. But the only thing about it was, like I said, I didn't get serious about it myself until the government made that press conference address, and that was like 2 days before it hit. So it got so it wasn't that much time to do a lot of things, especially for people that don't have emergency resources. These are the folks whose pantries aren't fulfilled with food. They don't have 2-3 cars in their garage that are all full of gas. And they have to go to work the next day to make sure that they continue to put food on their table the next day. And so those were majority of the folks that were able to keep up with us through social media, especially during the hurricane. But then right after the hurricane, about that 4th day, a lot of areas started to lose power. And so it ended up starting to be like a search and find. A lot of folks that were out of town, for those that don't know Wilmington, it is an old retired town, right? And so a lot of people that live there, aren't young and handsome like myself. And so with that being the case, a lot of people that are like my age on social media, folks were checking in with us to go and check on their elders, because even if they had electricity or not, they still may not have been social media savvy. And so we kind of started doing like little search and rescues and so forth and so on, and dropping off care packages to certain houses. And all of that happened through our social media. As a matter of fact, we had an inbox from one person, and particularly when they were talking about, they had called 911 dispatch. So a lot of people don't realize, but our local 911 dispatch was down. That line was redirected all the way to 211 in the Raleigh area. And so our social media kind of became a dispatch, and it was so promoted, and like so many people were able to see that that the actual nonprofit department from UNCW took over our social media and our email, so that my headache could come down just a little bit, because I was literally boots on the ground doing the recovery and handing out and sending the information of what we needed from the ground up. So yeah.
Okay. Mayor Newton, you were on CNN on camera before the storm started, and then during the event, it's still on YouTube if you want to look it up. He's talking to Jake Tapper on CNN over the phone and saying, "You can't get out, shelter in place, duck and cover." It's kind of a scary piece of film, actually.
Yeah.
So why spend that time and trouble talking to CNN when you got stuff to do locally?
So at hour 2 of day 1, we lost power. And from that point on, we're on cell phone. That's it. That's what we've got, so we're going to deal with it. One of the most important things as a town leader that you can do is to be visible and communicate. And that communication includes any curfews, any hazards, where you can get water, where you can get food. All this information needs to be pushed and not pulled, because if that communication is not there, there's a void. And where there's a void, that void will be filled, and generally speaking, that's not going to be filled with good news, right? So I feel really responsible to be visible in the community, but also do my best to get information to those who are wise enough to evacuate, because they've got concerns. They need to know what the situation is on the ground as well. So although, Carl, you had asked me, was that a burden to be able to do some of those press releases? It wasn't a burden at all. It was an obligation. I have to get this information to folks locally and to folks that chose to evacuate. And our first responders were outstanding. They were out in the community. They were talking to people, kind of seeing what their needs were as well. But it's really important for that visibility and that communication.
What other channels did you have to talk to your constituents?
So one of the great things, like Cedric had mentioned, there were a couple of social media folks in town. And once I got dialed into them, because they were starting to receive a lot of questions as well, once I got dialed in and I started pushing information to those social media sites, it really made life a lot easier because, again, getting that information into the people's hands was really important.
Okay. Each of the four of you have also touched on how this event highlighted the socioeconomic disparities in your communities, that there were people who didn't have the means to escape and now, a year later, don't necessarily have the means to recover very well. What does that look like on the ground right now in Beaufort?
So in Beaufort, we have had a great spring and a great summer. We have opened up a new hotel and restaurant. The Marine Lab's going to receive a new research vessel. We're going to open up a whaling conservation center. We're going to break ground on a healthcare facility. We've had a triathlon. We've had a wooden boat challenge. We just repelled the pirates for the 50th straight time, and we think we've held them at bay for another year. But underneath the surface, there are a lot of people that are struggling. We still have a lot of blue tarps. We still have businesses that are struggling to recover. So understanding, we knew in advance of Florence that we had this socioeconomic divide, this big gap between the have and the have-nots. Hurricane Florence exposed that gap. And now, my worst nightmare, what keeps me awake at night is how many folks still don't have shelter, how many are living in cars, how many are living in their homes with water damage because they have nowhere else to go. October the 2nd was my worst day because that's the day that we had to evacuate 109 apartments in one facility, 17 apartments in another facility, and there was no place to go. And that was really difficult. And even we're getting ready to start school again, and you can see the population of the schools has decreased because people have had to leave because they don't have shelter or they've got to go find a job somewhere, and that affects us locally to this day.
Cedric?
Same question. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you mentioned the folks that didn't have generators, didn't have 3 gassed-up cars.
Yeah.
What happened to those folks?
Yeah. So like I said, Wilmington's an old-retired town, so you can just kind of already imagine the disparities. For those that's not familiar with Wilmington, I'll use where we're at right now as an example. When I pulled up to the hotel yesterday, 2 gentlemen greeted me at my car. They looked like me. And they asked me, did I need help with my luggage or needed my car parked. Once I came into the hotel and went to go check into my room, the 2 people that were standing in fully air-conditioned facility didn't look like me. 1 white female, 1 white male. So let's say today a hurricane hit, right? Those 2 males that you saw that came and walked out to my car, I'm just assuming, but I'm guessing that maybe their income was a little bit lower than the ones that were behind the desk that I got my actual ID card from. But then these are 2 males that we're talking about. So they're looking at these guys to be the head of households, telling what they have to go back and provide for compared to the 2 counterparts that were behind the desk when I first came in to check in after being greeted by those gentlemen. So then a hurricane hits today, right? Let's just assume that the 2 gentlemen that helped me have like a family maybe of 2 or 3. And so now they have to figure out a way with the income that they've been making to be able to provide an escape route out, right? Now their house their pantry may not be fulfilled with food. Like I said, they may not even have a garage to have a car in a garage to have full tank of gas or not. And so this is not something that they're prepared for, where the other 2 counterparts may be in a household where their income that they're bringing in, they don't even have to use that to take care of the roof over their head at that moment. Or if they do, there's still other obligations that they can go and ride with family, et cetera, et cetera. And so for us, that was a really big issue. And then in Wilmington, it was an even bigger issue as it also looked like it was a racial issue and not just economic. And so for us, it hurt us tremendously because it was reflected by the government's decisions. The 3 places of distribution that they put were by the university, another by close to the beach area, and then the other right downtown by the river. all three of those areas, you had to make a certain amount of income to even exist in, right? And so as we did an actual study after the storm with UNCW, we actually realized that all of those locations where they were set up at was by the population of people that were able to either evacuate before the storm and also already had access to their own resources to be able to take care of themselves to recover from the storm. And also in those areas, they actually got power within the first week, if not maybe the first 1 to 3 days. And so we were able to become a powerhouse operation because of that decision that was made. After I just told you about all of those 3 points, none of those points were by any of the underserved areas in Wilmington. And so we were able to actually build a partnership with the local church that sat at like the most underserved part of Wilmington. And from there, we just had a glory story testimony. And it went from one day of serving 100 people that was right there within the local neighborhood, just from some kids coming, finding out that we have food, and then going back into the neighborhood to let the folks know. And then before you know it, we went from food to getting Operation Airdrop supplies to paper goods and so forth and so on. And then as that grew, we started to realize a lot of the other issues that people were dealing with. And we realized that it was bigger and deeper than just food, paper products, and cleaning supplies. And so we ended up going to giving out basic needs, to going out to actually giving out long-term recovery services. For example, we brought in an organization by the name of Step Up. I'm sure you all may be familiar with that organization. And they started to take in people's resumes to try to help people get jobs as jobs were coming in to help now start with recovery. We were able to partner up with Warm, which is a nonprofit that helps people that make under a certain amount of income. They did free house repairs. And so people within that area that own their homes, we were able to help them with free roof repairs and so forth and so on. We were able to partner up with nonprofits like Coastal Horizon that provide mental health care and so forth and so on, so that people can start talking some of their mental stresses and trauma out. And as we started to realize that, more stories and people started to talk about their situations about before the hurricane and how they got into these situations. And so right now, as we sit as the co-chair of the Unmet Needs and Case Management Committee for the Long-Term Recovery in New Hanover County, there's still no light at the end of your recovery journey if you're a renter that makes under $99,000, but you make over $30,000, right? So you make $100,000 or better or more annually, you're pretty much taken care of, and majority of those folks own their own homes. If you own your own home, there's a light at the end of that recovery journey. If you're a renter and you're not making like below 30,000, 20,000 income, there's a lot of services that can be provided to you and assist you. But now you fall between that gap, between that, you're just out here, and that's the majority of the folks that were affected. And it's not the folks, like I said, the 30,000 income or below, those folks are taken care of. The assistance is still there. It's the people that make just a little bit more that can't meet those requirements. And so those people, just to kind of paint a better picture in your head, this is the person that may cook your food at a local restaurant. This is the person that may be your child's teacher. Maybe your local firefighter or police officer. These folks fall through the cracks. So like a lot of single parent households, the research that we do in UNCW, 76.3 females were affected. 76.3% of the population was females that were affected by the storm. And so that meant single parent households, but then there was a lot of households that also missed that crack as well, because there are programs for single parent households, but let's say it's a two-parent household, but then one is a janitor, the other one may be a teacher, or then their income still isn't enough, and so there was no assistance for them. And these people are the ones that are still dislocated, living out of hotels, living in family members' living rooms that they haven't already overstayed their welcome or not, and are now living in their cars. And these are the people that we meet with still on a continuous daily and weekly basis. And it honestly, all the way at the top level, it seems like to be no answer as you continue to ride around Wilmington and still see luxury high-rise buildings being built and opening up, and people continuing to move in, and we're still trying to figure out around the corner if we want to turn this affordable housing area or public housing area into a parking lot.
Okay, thank you, Cedric.
Thank you.
Andy, what did you see among your neighbors or in your town?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd say that at the Marine Lab, we've had all the resources that Duke can bring to bear to help us recover, and it's taken us till this week to get everything back. We just moved into our last renovated, repaired building this week, and that's with the deep pockets that Duke has. I live down east, which is a series of small communities that really embody the word resilience, right? They have lived through hundreds of years of hurricanes. They know how to do it. And I think maybe Florence was a little, it was different, it was worse. And as Rhett said, you can still drive down east and there are a lot of blue tarps. People down east, a lot of people didn't have the resources to evacuate. Either they didn't have the money, didn't have anywhere to go. They were elderly, they were sick, they couldn't go. So they stayed, they lived through the storm, and they're still living through the storm now. And so I think it's really difficult. And I think one of the things, the impacts don't fall evenly, and people who live in underserved communities, live in impoverished communities, have been living for a year with this trauma. And I think it's a story that doesn't get enough light. And I think if one thing today I would like to one message I would like to leave with people, it's that disparity, and it's the fact that the storm hasn't finished for those people. And for our community partners and our neighbors down east, it's still going on. So,
Thank you.
Okay, this is the part that's the hardest to talk about, and it seems, for me anyway, the farther away from Florence we get, the harder it is for me to talk about it because the impacts are so significant. So I say that up front, so if I get a little emotional, you're prepared.
I got a box of Kleenex for you.
Thank you, because I don't usually do that in public. So, however, I could just say ditto to everything that's been said and not go further. But I do need to add our particular situation because pre-Florence we had Matthew, and Matthew, when it came through Robeson County, Lumberton in particular in that storm was the worst hit in the country, and had the most damage that Matthew put on one location. Now our population numbers don't go into the millions, et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes we feel not only the disparity as far as income and race and other social justice issues, but also size. Because part of what happened with Matthew, as you all may recall, is that the recovery monies for North Carolina were withheld. And so that the money could be sent, and there's so many storms I forget all the names, but Texas and Florida were hit, and the year after Matthew, and so our monies were withheld and sent to those places because they were considered to be in more need. Some of us joke, and this may not be appropriate in this context, that a Democratic governor was in office and that might have made a difference too. But anyway, people who were hit by Matthew were still waiting for some relief. And when you factor in that Robeson County is a county that's 3/4 the size of Rhode Island, it's a large geographic county, the largest in North Carolina. When Florence came, the impact wasn't just in Lumberton, which generally got the notice because of all of the I-95 damage. When I-95 is closed, that gets news coverage. However, if you go out into the county or even look at the data about the damage, most of the damage actually happened in the rural communities that were less prepared for this storm. As has been said by many, the East is used to hurricanes. I grew up with hurricanes, and we loved watching the wind and the electricity and all of the drama related to it. There was at least one article written during the Florence period that said, storms are not the problem for North Carolina, poverty is. And it really did deal, that article. It was on the internet, and I can't remember the author right now, but it was really so spot on and powerful in that it laid out the disparities in terms of not just the aftermath, but what had happened before. and the conditions that people were already living in. Now, in our case, in Robeson County, with the way that the flooding, I mentioned that we were able to leave after 3 days, and I consider myself a privileged person because of that. But I followed everything. And very close to our home were pictures that were being streamed showing the flooding in Pembroke been flooded. I mean, that's what people were saying, that this had never happened. And that flooding, because we don't live very far out of town, was moving towards our home. So I literally expected to go home and find not just the yard flooded, but maybe it hadn't actually gotten into the house. So the impact of Florence was different. It was very different from all the hurricanes in my lifetime anyway. And if my mama was alive, she probably would have said, ooh, this reminds me of Hazel. Because everything reminded her of Hazel. even though in the stacking order of storms, Hazel's not number one, but Hazel was her reference point. And so the inundation that occurred in the rural communities, as I go around the county and have conversations with people, have conversations with service providers, there are so many homes that people are not able to move back home for. Many of them are living with other family members. They're living in small RVs. They're living in their cars, whatever. They're not going to leave. A lot of those folks aren't going to leave. This is historic home. These are many of them are Lumbee people or other Native peoples who have deep geographic roots into the community. They're not going to leave, and yet they are facing the mold problem. They can't go into their homes because they have not had any mitigation for the mold in their homes. And so they may never be able to go back into their homes. And so they're facing that possibility now. And as I said, we can't separate Matthew and Florence because it is a cumulative impact. And for me, I really get very frustrated when I read articles in various forms of media or see television news presentations, and everybody starts with Florence and Michael. And I want to say, what about Matthew? In North Carolina, in the east, I know that Robeson's not the only place that was affected by Matthew. It is a cumulative effect that we're facing, and those problems have not been mitigated. In terms of the 30,000 and below, we do face that problem in Robeson, that they may have resources that they could be taken care of, but because of the rural aspect of the county, they don't know about those resources. And what has been determined is that, and we talk about this a lot via social media as well as in other gatherings, that we really do need to consider going back to the mutual aid type of societies that we had in place, where in fact, now that we have not had a hurricane yet, people are still in planning mode, and there are efforts for people to begin to set up systems whereby they know where there's elders, disabled, and others who may not be able to have resources such as a smartphone or other ways to stay in touch, and to set up these kind of mutual aid chains so that people will already be assigned who to go check and how to, what type of need they will have. And I heard you saying the same thing earlier as well. And so as we're looking at this new day of the coming storms, the conversations is really looking at what are the historic patterns we had for staying in place before there was televisions, before, I'm old enough to remember when we got our first TV, and TV was pretty new still then. So before televisions, there was a way that we stayed in touch with each other. And so we are actually beginning to talk about those ways and how they can be reestablished. Now, this does not get our government agencies off the hook, because people are also very interested in learning what are the responsibilities of government, because they don't feel that government has stepped up in appropriate ways. And I applaud you, Mayor, for all of the things that you were able to do for your constituency. But so there's a learning curve now that the communities are very interested in learning more about what they might or might not expect from their government agencies. Hurricanes in the past, people lived through them, got up, went to school, had 3 days off from school, 4 days off from school, and then it was okay. And so there wasn't this type of need of knowing who they could go to and what they could expect to get. And so this is a very important piece of communications that we're finding that again, the social media is useful in being able to communicate those types of available resources, and also the organizing model that has to be used at the community base level so that they can know who their representatives are and what they can expect to get from those representatives and how to hold those representatives accountable. Because it is a new day. Like I said, with Matthew, folks just pretty much thought, well, we've had so many hurricanes, we don't have to worry about this, we can live through it. And then Matthew came, and yes, they lived through it, but it was not the same. And then when Florence came, the impact was so great that they have actually begun to organize themselves around being self-advocates. We are, as I said, we're the largest county geographically. We're also a Tier 1 county, which is a county of persistent poverty, which I assume all of you know. So that the cumulative effects we're talking about today with Matthew and Florence is one thing, but the cumulative effects of poverty go back generations. And that is really what we find ourselves needing to influence, not only the direct impact of the storms, but how these impacts over years of being ignored can be addressed in the context of the current divide that we need to face.
Thank you, Donna. That is actually the perfect segue to the last thing I want you guys to respond to, and then we can open it up for questions. The question is, well, the topic of this is lessons learned. So you've already touched on a few of those things. I wanted to ask you more directly, Donna, what's going to be different next time in Robeson County?
Next time we are going to have a much more informed population, one that is, I feel, will be much more prepared. The social media systems have become stronger. I want to learn more about yours and how we might be able to tap into the university as well. Unfortunately, our university was shut down for almost 2 weeks as well with Florence and with Matthew. But there are systems being put in place that will be able to supplement the government resources that might be available, and there will also be resources in place after the storm that were not in place before Matthew or Florence. And so that is a positive step forward as we're looking at the next hurricane, well, we're in the next hurricane season, hoping that this is an off year.
So Andy, you mentioned the satellite phones, but it remains the case that your lab is about 18 inches above sea level. What does the future hold for the Marine Lab?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've been thinking about that a lot. We are going to undertake a resiliency study, to do a self-study to see, what we can do better in the future as we think about life on the coast. I think one of the things we would like to do is to provide some examples of how we can build and live sustainably in an area that is prone to hurricanes. Duke has the resources to help us think about those kinds of questions, think about how we can build and live and learn in a place that's prone to hurricanes. So we're thinking about that as we go forward. And we're also thinking about working with our community partners to be able to leverage some of the resources that we have access to, and some of the human resources. Like, our students were awesome after the storm. They went house to house down east. They went house to house in some of the underserved parts of our county, knocking on doors and asking what people needed. So we have this great resource of both, finances and people that we can mobilize after storms, and we need to think about how we can leverage that to the best extent possible.
Good, thanks. Cedric, what's going to be different next time? You've had to sort of ad hoc create that emergency services center in your church. Is that going to be an established thing next time?
Yeah. So we, and when I say we, New Hanover County has actually been working pretty good at trying to be proactive for the next storm. Just to kind of break down our experience with the place of distribution that we operated out of, we averaged 75 volunteers in 2 weeks on a daily basis. And then we got over 90 donations. And all of that came from the power from our social media. And so what we realized during that time, which was a great thing, before the hurricane, a lot of organizations, businesses, nonprofits or what have you, all kind of just hang out on their own islands. And this hurricane also exposed that disparity, not just poverty, but just the everybody plays in their own sandbox, and how that doesn't really solve big issues and makes a big shift and change. And so now we've actually put together a New Hanover County disaster coalition that is fulfilled up with many of the 1,000 nonprofits that fulfill Wilmington and New Hanover County's area. And we have that split up in different committees. And now every other week we have a case management committee where people that still are being affected by the storm and still need come and present to us what they need, and from everything from monetary things to appliances to room and board to food to job employment you can imagine, and it's a coalition of people that sit at the table to try to stress their resources to get those people with what they need. So that's one proactive approach that's already being made. I'm totally not supposed to be talking about this, but there's been a few $1 million that has came from the state level now to help us with providing housing for those that were displaced but owned a home before the storm, and that is definitely very well, and good. But like I already said, majority of the people that were affected by the storm are renters, and if you rent a home, there is no solution for that. And so the thing that we're really trying to figure out right now is how can we help solve that issue. But other than that, there has been a lot of proactive steps to helping with all of the other basic needs and so forth and so on. By we now have hurricane prepared mixers now, to where the coalition, all nonprofits come out, bring their tables, bring their resources, and then we also may hand out food packages and tarps and stuff like that, because it is the height of hurricane season and we don't want to wait until the hurricane is coming up the water. So we have already started to do that. And then last but not least, we just got a grant from North Carolina Community Foundation and Local News Lab. And what we're doing with that is to help people recover from the storm mentally at this point, where we'll be providing icebreaker mixers to get people in front of therapists and mental therapists, massage therapists, yoga aroma therapists, and hopefully that icebreaker helps them to continue that journey on their own, confidentially and private.
Great, thank you. What's going to be different next time, Mayor Newton?
Well, we've done a better job of protecting our communications infrastructure. We've got on fiber. We've pushed all the servers to an area that has a generator, so that won't be as affected. We have the capabilities now to push better information to the citizens, because when you talk about weather categories, you're just talking about wind, and you're not talking about storm surge. And it's that storm surge in our particular area that's the real threat for us. And Dr. Rick Ludick at UNCIMS, he's now been able to model at very fine scale. So how do we connect all this information far beyond a category and kind of get that information to people and say, this is what's going to happen in your neighborhood. This is the best model that we have. And during Florence, we really didn't stress the logistics. There was transportation available that wasn't taken advantage of. We had a Nightdale shelter in Wake County that we could have gotten people to. And there are 50 different reasons why people don't evacuate. Everything from I don't feel like I've got the money, I've got pets, I've never left before, so why should I leave now? There are 50 different reasons, and I've got to do a better job of articulating, you need to leave. And if it's severe enough and Cat 3, 4, 5 with the right circumstances, I'm out of here. And the first responders, it would be irresponsible of me to ask first responders to stay behind and risk that threat. So we're going to, under the certain circumstances, we're all leaving. And the storm's going to come, and then we're going to come back and we're going to deal with the aftermath. So that communication piece is just critical. And we've got to be able to paint the picture. We've got to let people know that there are options available to be able to get out, and you need to leave under certain circumstances. You need to leave. It's just not safe to stay behind. We're doing a better job of communicating. Karen Amsbacker's here. Barbara Garrity Blake is here. They are forces in the eastern part of the county, and we depend on them because we are linked. We're coworkers, we're family, we're friends, we're classmates. There's not Beaufort and the rest of the eastern part of the county. We're all one, and we have to look out for each other there. So we need to do a better job of communicating that as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's open up for questions. Robin is the microphone hauler. Go ahead.
Thanks. So what should cities, counties, and the state do to ensure that there's more affordable housing built outside flood-prone areas?
That's to our elected officials.
Sure. Yeah.
Definitely.
Workforce housing, affordable housing is a critical issue in Beaufort, and we're starting to build in that direction. Right now, some of our price points for, say, some of the new subdivisions are $350,000 and up. That's not affordable, right? It's okay if you're a second home owner, you want to come in from Raleigh on a weekend, but that's not affordable for the workforce. So we're emphasizing that, and you'll see more of that in the next couple of years.
And how are you doing it?
Well, in one case, a developer wants to come in and he has purchased land from the town specifically for workforce housing. There's a market. So this is one of those things, the $350 and above price point is not, it's not as great as that workforce housing and affordable housing is, strangely enough. And so the market's there, so I don't have to force this too much. It's going to happen.
Anybody else want to have a go at that?
I would let them know the results of that.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
I'm not going to disagree with Rhett, but I fear for the future because Beaufort is going to become like Wilmington. When we have Interstate 42, and we talk to the folks in our county, and they look at the growth that they're anticipating in our county, it's second homes and it's retirees. And those are the $350,000 and above houses. So I fear about affordable housing, and I fear about the future in storms for the service workers who are working at our hotels and our restaurants, just like you were saying in Wilmington. Mm-hmm. So I understand, but I think we all need societally to do a better job to provide affordable housing for those folks.
I think from what we found out, like I told you about the thing that I wasn't supposed to tell you about.
We forgot.
Right. Yes. Thank you for totally forgetting. But basically, when we first asked about why that couldn't be for renters or what have you, a developer can come and say that this space is for affordable housing for right now, open it up for the first year,
Right.
move a bunch of people in at an affordable housing rate,
Right.
and then all of a sudden see the other guy down the block making a killing, or I shouldn't say killing, but making a great living off of charging, unaffordable housing wage, and then they can easily make that decision that next year, next day, to go and turn it right into luxury living. So what we're trying to do is get a developer to sign under like a constituent contract that they will stick to this this cost amount for this person that's living here in this space. And then we're also trying to figure out if there's any other programs that could help make the developer happy that wouldn't put all of that disparities and effects on the actual person that's renting that space for them.
So would that be for like a specific time period, or would that be for a while a specific renter was living there?
As far as what the price change?
Yeah.
So you live in, you live in your house for rent, and then when it's time for your lease to come back up, sometimes how they sometimes have like rates went up a little bit. That's it. That's that type of example.
Well, and I have a question for that too, because I want to talk to you about that idea. So I'm hearing rent control in terms of if I move into a house, you will try to have it in the contract that as long as I'm there, the rent won't go up?
Correct.
Okay, that is an interesting model, so we'll talk.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is that affordable housing is a critical element of all of this, because as you're looking at, again, my reference point is Robeson County, we have lost so much of our population because of people who had to leave and can't come back. Some that chose to leave, they had other places they could relocate and so forth. It's already having an impact on our county budget. The school has a deficit of over $1 million, and so they're looking at having to close school and not renew contracts. And so when you're looking at a county who's already in distress and is known for its distress, affordable housing is a part of what has been added on. It's part of the cumulative impact, because we're losing students, voters, and in one sense it's political, economic, and social power as well with the folks who had to move out. And mostly it's lower middle and lower income people who have to leave and can't come back.
For the census.
It has a great implication for the census, not only because they're gone, but also in doing the census, folks are already talking about not knowing how to locate people because they don't know where they may be in their car, in an RV or whatever. So the census will have huge implications for the next getting out budgets, federal and state budgets. So affordable housing is a critical element, and I appreciate what I heard the mayor say in terms of the focus needing to be there. I think that our leaders need to realize that it is not only because it is a service to people who need affordable housing, but it's a service to the county, city, any jurisdiction that is there, because they will maintain their population and people who have had long-term roots and who will care about what happens. And so affordable housing is not just a charity, it's something that is beneficial to the entire population of the county, including those in $350,000 homes.
Nice, thank you. Another question? Oh, sorry.
This should be an easy one. You talked about social media as being very important. What channel really? What are you talking about? Are you talking about Facebook? If we're picking up, trying to figure out where to communicate with people and where to share news, what's the most important channel?
So I'll just break our social media down by the number of our followers. So on Facebook, I guess apparently you can't have over 5,000 friends. That's my capacity on Facebook. But then Support the Port, my nonprofit, before the hurricane actually hit, we had about 2,800 followers on our social media, and then after the storm hit, and up to date now, we have about 4,500 on our social media now on Facebook itself, on our Facebook platform. But then on our Instagram platform, we went from about 1,300 to about 2,000, 2,200 folks on the Instagram, and I have 4,000 personally on mine. So between that, I guess that's about 10, 15,000 folks that we're able to reach just through Facebook and Instagram. But I do know that Twitter was a very strong platform as well. I wasn't operating our Twitter page. I've outgrown that platform. And so joke.
Come on now.
I'm just playing. I'm just kidding. But we were able. But Twitter was very effective as well. But Facebook was our dominant.
So the answer is all of the above?
Yeah.
Yes.
Not MySpace.
Okay, can we have one question over
and
here?
that was the same for us as well.
Yeah,
The same order.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Okay. The communication is very important, but do you have any plans to how to reach other communities to speak other languages different than English, for example, Spanish?
Totally. That was one of the most hot topics, other than the community we were out helping, because for one, people not trusting giving information to folks because they don't know what people's agenda are about undocuments, and then so that was a really huge issue. I know with us, we had to establish and let it be known that this is a safe space for undocuments, and that we do have a translator, a bilingual translator here, ready to help and assist. And that did happen, and then there was folks that reached out to the dispatch and other organizations that ended up going to those Latin communities. Actually, we definitely should take our hat off to the university for doing that. A lot of the bilingual teachers there and Latin teachers that were there took that initiative to make sure that they got into those communities and made sure that nobody was dealing with ICE or anything of that nature, and that we were strictly making sure that these folks were getting the assistance that they needed. So yes, you're absolutely right, and that was something else that was exposed during the storm as well, definitely.
And in our case, we did have Facebook was the source by which there were occasional call-outs for Spanish speakers to be advocates to be on site at the large recovery sites. for security, so they could be interveners and advocates for Spanish-speaking clients who were coming in. So that was a big source, and it's one that really needs to be expanded.
Yeah, because even right now, we're still having an issue as we deal with long-term recovery and the case management unmet needs committee. Sometimes we have people present, and so like certain nonprofit organizations had to provide a social security number just to help you to keep up with those numbers. And so right now, one of the issues is for some folks that we have came across that are undocumented is how do we get them the assistance that they need without having to go through the ordinary procedures that are taken. For example, like we can't get the resources unless we provide them with a social security number. Yeah.
This will be the last question then. We're at time.
This is for Donna and Cedric. I'm curious, in our community, it seems like since Florence, with a lot of homes destroyed and people displaced, rents and entry-level home prices have gone up. And I guess the realtors call that a seller's market, but it seems like price gouging or greed to me. But are you seeing that in your communities as well?
Oh my
Yes, yes. I think yes is a simple answer. With the rent and other things related to a place to stay, but also with services. So yes.
For me, we've seen it in, let's say, so, and this goes back to kind of your question too. Certain apartment complexes were emergency evacuated and emergency evicted, right? So I think it's like 4 of them. 2 were the Latin community, and the other 2 were low-income African American community, right? And so one of these locations, one of these affordable housing locations is surrounded by luxury housing. And so it was like, oh, the storm messed up the roofs. We should shut this place down. Oh, now the owner wants to sell it. And so we're dealing with issues like that where people are right about his neighborhood and forget seeing blue tarps. The blue tarps are ripped apart at this point. It's like, what are we doing with this area, right? Because all of these families, all of these displaced kids have already moved on, and it's still seen, and you guys aren't even moving forward to help replace this space. And then we also have issue with another one of those areas was a project housing, and so a lot of the people had to go find temporary housing until that was back up and developed. But then when it gets back up and developed, they now have to move out of the temporary housing issue and then move back into the house. But let's say for a lot of folks, their solution was they just went and got another place to stay, 12-month rent, and maybe got some assistance to stay there. But now they have to break this lease to go back into this affordable housing situation. When the next year comes back up for them to renew that lease back into that affordable housing, they'll now have a contract broke from the past housing that they were just in. And so it's issues like that that we're currently dealing with. And yeah, it's not good. And then it's also really not good when majority of your government seat holders are real estate agents. Yeah.
All right. Please join me in thanking this panel. That was an amazing discussion.